Yo, I did it.
Any other information?
Maybe you should clarify that on Wednesday.
Oh. That's a good point. I didn't even think about that. I know this is probably. This is probably useless with no one thinking that, no one's thinking that we're doing this at 4 fucking AM.
Oh, boy, boy.
Oh, yeah. So.
Hello.
Well, it's not, okay.
My bag's just gonna get dragged, that's all.
She's dragging her bag.
More people coming back. Either way, I got it. Change my uniform and cry before practice.
Oh, boy.
So actually, we're still right workshop.
It's starting in just a second. I was just setting up the live stream.
Come on, I'm just telling you. I literally know where to go. It's like, I suppose we'll stay here.
There we go. No.
You know, with your workshop, answer the question.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow. I'll be starting just a couple minutes. We got the microphone for anyone who wants to be talking. I'm going to be over in the corner. That is on a delay. That's fine. So give it 1 to 2 more minutes for any stragglers. That will be on our way.
Welcome, welcome.
Hello. Lewis, are you able to hear us all right over Zoom? Well, I hope so.
What?
I was asking the guy on Zoom if
Oh.
he hears. All right. One more minute just to officially start at 1 p.m. How's everyone's day?
Good.
Good. Are you still able to see if I sit right here?
Yeah.
Okay. And it's officially 1 p.m. I will be starting. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first writing workshop of the school year. I am Brandon. I am the writing director, the head honcho, the Elden Lord of Writing. I stole the position from the last lady because she got a job at Blizzard. But now I'm here without a job at Blizzard. Sad. We don't have to talk about that. Anyways, I'm going to introduce you to the wonderful world of game writing with an introduction to game writing. So, pop quiz. What do all 6 of these games have in common? Now, we have some really diverse looking things, both in art style and gameplay. We got Red Dead Redemption 2, an ultra realistic looking open world RPG FPS type thing, set in the West in the 1880s, I think. 1880s, 1890s, doesn't matter. Then we also got Celeste, which is a 16-bit non-realistic platformer, and Majora's Mask, a N64 game that relies on you turning into a Deku scrub and a fisherman. These don't really seem like they have anything in common, but they do. And that's because they all have very well-known and interesting stories, because stories are important. Any of these games can potentially be standout by itself, but what really draws people in and keeps them hooked on it is the story. Everyone wants to hear about the Fall of the Vanderland game. Everyone wants to see how Link can restore the moon from crashing into the earth within 3 days. Or Outer Wilds, where you have to figure out how to stop the universe from imploding in 22 minutes. They all have very interesting hooks that keep you wanting to know more about the story and the characters involved. And that's why we keep playing them in addition to gameplay. That's why stories are important in your game, because these games integrate story into their gameplay. So, what makes game writing different from, say, other writing, like in a movie or like a book or a screenplay or something like that? With game writing, you have to think about interactivity and player control. In a movie, in a book, in a screenplay, you have some interpretation on, oh, how's the reader going to interpret this line? Or how is this actor going to portray this part of the dialogue? But that's still scripted. Every time you go watch like Avengers Endgame, you know how it's going to end, right? Like everything's going to fall into place right in the same way. Everything's going to happen the same way as it did the 5 other times you went to go see Avengers Endgame. Games, though, it's different every single time. Even in a game that's linear, i.e., like there's a set plot point A to B to C until you hit the end, the journey along that same way is not the same. Maybe you do a side quest super early this round, or maybe you just don't even talk to like half the NPCs and just speed run through the entire game, or maybe you do every single side quest and talk to every single person, uncover the entire map before you even beat the first dungeon, like I did with Breath of the Wild. So you have to account for that when you're trying to create the story, especially if it's in something like open world. You can't control whoever's playing, so you have to accommodate for that play space. And the player action has to be able to move the story forward. So even if it's something minute, like save someone from getting chased by bandits in, say, Red Dead Redemption 2, that could then come back and he gives you a free discount at a shop. Like even little things can progress the story forward as long as you depend on player action. You also have to think about audio and visual assets. That's somewhat similar to movies. However, movies, again, are all scripted. Every single note is going to hit beat per beat per beat, but you don't know exactly what the player is going to be doing. So that's when you get into the realm of like dynamic soundtracks and like audio spheres, but audio and visual assets are a great way of being able to spice up your writing and really give the story or dialogue or really impactful moment more oomph while not having it being super scripted. So all this to say, what exactly does a game writer do? I'm going to leave this as like an open question. What does a game writer do? At least from your opinion. And there's no wrong answers. Yes.
The game like more immersive and more like. It makes it, as you said before, makes the players come onto the game.
Yep. Yep.
Make story points that could also be very interactive with the player.
Absolutely. Anyone else?
Dialogue.
Dialogue, absolutely. Yeah, these are all things that a game writer can do. Now, I do want to make one little point. The term game writer. Now, for the things that we do in VGDC, and for a lot of like indie productions, like people, like in teams of less than say like 40 people, game writers can do a whole lot of things. They can do all the stuff that you mentioned here. When you get into like the AAA space where you're working on a game that has literally hundreds of people working on a game, then you get to specialize a little bit. So what they also have is narrative designers. These are people that are strictly there to focus on how is the plot's going to be, what is the plot beats for your game? What is like the characters in your game and how are their relationships connected to each other? Where do we put all the different parts of your story throughout the game world? That's an entirely different job than, say, a game writer, where they just work on dialogue or on lore or item descriptions, stuff like that. But for our purposes in VGDC, we kind of just do all of that. You got to wear a lot of hats in indie, and especially here when you work on teams of like 5 people. So we're going to be doing the job of a character designer, a game writer, a dialogue writer, a character designer, all in one hat that we are going to be calling game writers. So if you hear me say those things interchangeably, they're all essentially the same thing for our purposes in the club. And this is just kind of summarizing what I just said. So you have narrative designers, which are going to help with creating the characters in your game. What are like their basic features so you can give them to the artists and have them try and concept it out. You have people who are going to be making the world. Is it a desert planet or are you under the water? If so, what should the structures basically look like? You want to give enough detail to, say, your artists and your audio engineers to get them going on the right path that you're envisioning, but not necessarily that you're trying to hardline them into one concrete thing, because you also want some artistic divergence. There's also, of course, story plotting. Like, what is going to happen when and where and how? That's very important. That's where you get into like the I think it's called like the triangle of action or something, like introduction, inciting incident, rise, climax, and then denouement or whatever it's called. It's been like 4 years since I took English, but it doesn't matter. So you have all that. Then you have your actual writing. That's going to be the dialogue, people talking to each other, or just ambient things that people are saying to themselves as they walk around the world. You got quest text. Yes, writers also involve quest text and making it seem more diegetic, something that would actually happen in the world and is spoken in the prose of the world. If you're set in Victorian England and your quest text is, hey, go get that thing, okay? That doesn't sound right. You have to make sure that it actually sounds like something that would be in this world. Flavor text. Everyone knows about Dark Souls, right? You all know about Dark Souls, right? They're known for very interesting flavor text, right? And then you have a bunch of other stuff, tooltips and like other UI text. Again, all to make it one cohesive voice for your narrative world. And there's a whole lot of others that I can't fit onto one slide or one presentation. So this goes into the narrative design. This is the character relationship tree from, I believe, Dragon Age. I forget if I got this from Dragon Age or from a different game, but they're all pretty much the same. So this is plotting out like who are all these characters? Who's married? Who's betrothed? Who's our child of whom? Who's no longer together? Who's broken on their generations? Who's dead? That's important in terms of narrative design. And this goes into the flavor text and the basic writing that I was talking about. A floating phantom that illuminates its surroundings, seemingly the lingering spirit of the young girl on an eternal search for her sister, whom she promised to see the stars. Doesn't that sound so much better than just putting spirit ashes, summons a spirit jellyfish. It gives it flavor, makes you invested in the spirit jellyfish ashes and use it for your entire run. At least for me, anyways. Now, there are some challenges and realities when it comes to game writing. Essentially, these are the things we can't exactly do, mainly in context of the club, because, well, we're students. We have other responsibilities outside the club and can't devote endless amounts of time, 8 to 9 hours a day, just working on writing and design and blah, blah, blah. But this is also really applicable to, say, indie studios, or heck, even on big AAA projects if you are split between multiple projects, right? So number one is scope. We often lack the time or resources to tell the stories we like to do. We all really like the big fantasy world of, say, Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones, but we don't always have the resources to make Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones. So we have to be conscientious of what we can and cannot do. How do we do this? You tell the story as efficiently as you can. Conserve text so you don't have to spend a long time with the voice actors. Conserve the amount of space on screen so you can put in more space for your gameplay. Don't make gigantic tooltips or like big old quest boxes in the corner of your screen. Oh, there we go. So I put the example of PT here. Can anyone tell me why I would want to talk about PT in terms of limiting your scope? Exactly. PT, for those that don't know, it's a very, very famous horror game that takes place in pretty much 3 rooms that you just keep looping through again and again and again. Each time it's just a little bit different. You get so much gameplay from just 3 rooms that you're already set dressed and you just change a little bit with each iteration. That's really good use of scope and how much you can use your art assets in a very interesting and unique way, right? So you'll also hear when you're talking about like your projects here or like in indie studios that you need at least a proof of concept or minimum viable product. This is just like the base game in itself. It's not going to look that pretty. It's going to be a lot of just like producer art, which is like blocks and lots of just like gray checkered textures on everything. But it works. It gets the idea across. It gets a sense of scale and space around you. And while your dialogue boxes and stuff might not be the prettiest, you can at least put in your sample dialogue for now and get a feel for what the environment is going to be. That's very important with your writing, is that you want to put in your writing in your minimal viable product so people can get a better sense of the story you're trying to convey as soon as possible, so you can have people start prototyping your minimum viable product. And of course, the more experience you have making games, working in game jams, working on bigger teams with, say, like people from other colleges, the more you'll understand what kind of scope you can do for a game based on its concept. That's just something you get from experience. And also, space can vary. Who here has played Tetris? All right. What is the story of Tetris? Exactly. There's no space in Tetris for a story because it doesn't need one. It's just gameplay. Not every game is going to need a story or like a big expansive background to whatever you're doing. But other games, such as Inside, will have more space to tell a story. So depending on the game that you're trying to go for, whether it be FPS versus like RPG, they're going to have different amounts of leeway for how you can tell your story, right? And another way that you can integrate space better is to integrate your narrative into the mechanics. This is something I'm going to be harping on a lot through these workshops, is that you need to integrate your writing into your gameplay. This is a great way of conserving the amount of narrative space, i.e. just literal dialogue or writing or whatever, and save it for other moments that you absolutely have to get in some exposition. Well, instead, you could just convey narrative through your gameplay. The reason I put Inside here, Inside is a very, very story-rich game. No one talks in Inside. There is no text in Inside. It is all silent outside of some background ambient music and sound effects and yelps and screams when you fall off a cliff for the third time because you can't time it right. I'm not speaking from experience. But it still is able to tell a really rich story because they integrated it into the set dressing, into the gameplay. You're running away from cops with their dogs. You're trying to sneak into a secret laboratory. That's how you tell a story without having to tell a story, right? Say or show, don't say. So when the two work together, you have to spend a lot less time writing, voice acting, integrating. It just flows a lot better. And you capture people's attention a lot better than giant paragraphs of text. So, out of all this, number one thing, collaborate with your team, integrate your narrative with your gameplay. This is very important. Game writers, especially in our space, in the club, and in indie productions, are going to be wearing a ton of different hats. You're going to be doing character design. You're going to be doing some world building. You're going to be doing dialogue. You might have to do some voice acting directing if you're going to have voice actors. We're going to have to be able to do a lot of things. It's not going to be the easiest thing, but it can be very fun if you know that you're going to be doing a lot of hats. Doing a lot of hats, wearing a lot of hats. And also, fail faster. That's the motto of the club. The more experience that you have, understanding how to limit your scope, how to integrate your story into what you're actually doing in the game, and how to entrance people without having to say a word. You get that through making more games, making bad games, but learning from those bad games. Balan Wonderland is an example of where they did not fail fast enough. By the time Balan came out, the story and the gameplay were two very different things. If you've ever seen gameplay, this horrendous thing, what you're actually doing in the game and the stories that are trying to tell make no connection whatsoever. And it's just not very good. You're not interested in the characters. You're not interested in the gameplay because they feel like two very different things. Now, Balan had a lot of other things, including just really bad bugs and just very non-diegetic things going on, lots of dance parties for some reason. But the big thing is there wasn't a lot of collaboration. Each team was doing their own thing. The animators were spending a lot of time on their cutscenes instead of like character animations in the game or like graphic effects. The writers were making a really like emotional, rich thing while the gameplay engineers were just trying to recreate Super Mario Odyssey and failing to do so very badly. So, what to expect from future workshops this quarter? We're going to be talking about narrative structure. There's a lot of different ways you can do it, say with spreadsheets versus screenplays versus a lot of different things. We're going to be showing you how to actually structure out your character documents and your world documents so it's easier for your writers and your programmers to try and integrate this kind of thing. We're talking about screenplay formatting. Yes, we're doing two things about narrative structure. Screenplay formatting, it's the second one because it's very important to know how to do screenplay formatting, especially if you also want to do something with like Netflix where they're doing like movie games. Talking about environmental storytelling. Again, this goes into the thing that I'm going to harken on again and again and again about integrating your gameplay and your narrative into one cohesive thing. We're going to be talking about dialogue. We're going to be showing you how to use Twine. Twine is a very powerful tool if you want to make branching narratives. It's very cool. I've made a Twine game and it's very big and I'll show you. We're going to do case studies. Our writing director from last year, Jen, the one that got the Blizzard job, she did a really good one about Hades and how much she loves the writing in Hades. I did one about how much I fucking hate this game. This is from the Dark Anthology series. I hate it. Little Hope is awful and the writing is terrible. You will see why I hate it. And also just a lot of room for practice, feedback. We're going to be doing some resume portfolio stuff around week 5 and a lot more stuff. Yeah, the order is negotiable, of course. So let's talk, right? So here are just some ideas of how to get the ball rolling. I'll be asking them and you feel free to respond. I put the Outer Wilds soundtrack because I like it. I really like Outer Wilds and maybe I'll do a case study on it. Let me play it. Please work.
Speakers
Please.
on?
Oh. YouTube, please. Oh, is this done up? Thank you. Oh, well. It's fine. Let's just talk about this. So, what are some of the best stories you've encountered in a game? At the end of the game, old, new. What stories have you enjoyed in the game?
Little Nightmares,
Little Nightmares. How did they tell the story in Little Nightmares?
didn't tell it all, they showed it
Exactly. And how did they show it?
through cinematic, new gameplay and cinematic, walk, like, kind of like.
Exactly. That's why it was so interesting. Anyone else?
Bioshock,
Bioshock. How did they tell the story there?
a lot of showing, and also a bit of cleverness at the end.
Yep.
The Last of Us.
Hmm?
The
Last of Us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a lot, that was done through a lot of dialogue, cutscene, that's more typical medium, but
Yep. Very well written dialogue. Really great voice actors. And now a TV show, I guess. Yeah.
Uncharted series.
Uncharted, similar to The Last of Us. Very good voice actors. Very good dialogue. Yeah. Now, how did the mechanical design? So essentially, what can you do in this game? What can you not do in this game? Where can you go? Where can you not go? And why? How does that influence how the stories were told or where the stories went? So for instance, in Red Dead Redemption 2, you're limited in your mobility by just riding on horses. There's some fast travel with carriages, but you can't just zoom around the map in a car. You have to go on foot or you ride a horse. And so you're taking a lot of the environment. You're encountering people on the road. Sometimes they're like highway robbers, or there's people who need your help in repairing their wagon or fighting off a bear as you're walking down the street. And that lets you take in more of the world without just zooming right through it.
Resident Evil 8.
What was it?
Resident Evil 8.
Resident Evil 8. Yes.
Outlast.
Yes. Outlast. Resident Evil 8.
What?
What was that?
In Resident Evil 8, so like in map wise, it'll guide you through the boss on one, like most games. But it also had to be like it really emphasizes a lot of the main character's aspects,
Yep.
traits that become narratively important later on.
Yep. Yeah. Like the intro is Lady Domitress's mansion, right? It's huge, it's very regal, it's luxurious, right? And you get that through all the different like wine cellars and really ornate rooms that you encounter versus like Lady Beneviento. It's a very cramped house full of like creepy dolls looking at you all the time, right? It really draws you into the atmosphere just through like clever prop placement and natural design of the level itself being integrated into the story that they're trying to tell in those levels. Now, this next question kind of goes into the idea of space in games. So how do we tell stories in different genres? So an RPG has a lot of room for just writing dialogue or like having cutscenes and whatnot, versus like an FPS. There's not a whole lot of room to just be espousing dialogue at you while you're trying to fend off waves of zombies, right? So how do these differ in how they convey their stories? Like, how do you better convey what you're trying to get across to the player in a high stakes FPS versus a slow turn-based RPG?
I think I know, like in some FPS, like in Call of Duty, you have action, like you're playing your game, you're shooting, and it immediately thrusts you into like a smaller cutscene, and
Yep.
maybe there's like small like dialogue or even telling you something, and then it transitions to another gameplay. It's like
Yep.
one after the other, rapid fire.
Yeah,
Or games can be completely combined.
yeah,
It's not really RPG or strategy, but MMOs, they have open world, a lot of those for environmental storytelling.
yeah.
For RPGs, I just want to mention, Mori. So that game has a lot of dialogue boxes, and they don't have any voice acting, which gives you a sense of your own opinion on, or like, on how they would sound.
Yeah, the decision to have or not have a voice actor is important. Obviously, it can come down to like budget and scope, but it also lets you develop your own voices for these characters. Like a lot of people have their own voices for Papyrus, right? It's usually like a sort of Skeletor-y, sort of like maniacal villain from like the 1920s twirly mustache type voice, right? But he doesn't have an actual voice actor. It's just like blips and blops.
For like social simulators, like Persona, for example, yeah, the text box allows you to absorb more of the character itself and like allows you to like develop your feelings towards them better than like, let's say, a non-social simulator where you had to go by your characters like really fast.
Yep.
In the game Stray that came out recently, there's a lot of like rooms that you can enter, not rooms, areas you enter, where there's the story, but there's also a lot of things you just play around with because you're a cat, so you climb on walls, push things over, mess around, and they kind of integrated that into the story as well at some points, but they give you those options early on just to like mess around and just do that kind of stuff.
Yep. And Lewis in the chat is talking about Tales of Iron. They conveyed the story through simple animation, text boxes, and sort of animal-y sound effects. Certain genres might have to rely a lot on gameplay, text, or animation to convey some kind of story. Absolutely, yes. Very important.
I think similar to like more, you have like visual novels that are just heavily reliant on
Yep.
text, images. There is room for environmental storytelling, but I'd say it's more reliant on images. But if you want like a really story-rich game, I'd say visual novels, they're heavy on text.
Yeah. These are all good questions, and we'll be exploring them future workshops as well. So that's it for me. Is there any other last questions before we wrap up?
Is this meeting every Friday or is it bi-weekly?
It's every Friday. Yes. We do it weekly. Yeah.
So what can we expect in future workshops? Like will we be working like practicality or is it gonna be more like theory?
So it's going to be talking about best practices, tips on how you could improve like your dialogue, your world building. And usually at the end of every workshop for writing, we like to do like a little activity. So for the screenplay one, we have like write a screenplay involving these two characters, make it 2 pages max or something like that. Or in the flying one, we might have you make a really short flying game using the things that you learned in the workshop. So we like to balance like theory with actual practice with our workshops. What else? All right, well, thank you all for showing up. Stop my share. And see y'all Friday at